The boutique, Elegance Privée, wasn't just a store. It was a sanctuary for the ultra-rich, nestled in the heart of Beverly Hills. Its grand facade shimmered under golden lights, inviting only those who truly belonged. Inside, the scent of French perfumes lingered in the air, mingling with the delicate aroma of freshly poured champagne, served only to those deemed worthy. Rows of hand-stitched designer pieces, imported from Milan and Paris, hung like pieces of art. The boutique didn't just sell clothes, sold status. And ensuring that only the right people walked in was Vivienne, the boutique's ice-cold manager. Vivienne was notorious. For her sharp eye, nothing slipped past her radar. Dressed in a sleek black suit, her diamond-studded heels clicking against the marble floors, she surveyed the store like a queen ruling her empire. In her world, wealth had a look, and anyone who didn't match that aesthetic was simply not welcome. Then, the boutique door chimed softly, signaling the entrance of a new customer. Vivienne turned her head, expecting to see yet another Hollywood elite, perhaps a model, a billionaire's wife, or a socialite. Instead, she saw a woman in a simple gray hoodie, black sweatpants, and a baseball cap. Her posture was relaxed, her movements unhurried, and her face was half hidden behind sunglasses. The woman scanned the boutique leisurely, her fingers lightly grazing an exquisite silk gown, worth more than an average person's salary. Vivienne's expression turned to stone. A tourist? No, someone worse, a window shopper. Someone with no intention of buying. She couldn't allow that. With a forced smile, she made her way toward the woman, ready to do what she did best: get rid of those who didn't belong. Excuse me. Vivienne's voice dripped with feigned politeness. Can I help you? Sandra Bullock turned slightly, her lips curling into a small, polite smile. No, thank you, I'm just looking. Vivienne's forced politeness didn't waver, but her sharp, assessing gaze flickered over Sandra's appearance. The gray hoodie, loose sweatpants, and worn-out sneakers, a complete mismatch to the world of haute couture. Ah, I see. Vivienne's tone shifted slightly, laced with a thinly veiled condescension. Just so you're aware, everything here is custom-made and exclusive. We don't carry anything off the rack. Sandra raised an eyebrow behind her sunglasses, amused but not surprised. She had encountered people like Vivienne before, gatekeepers of luxury, who believed wealth came with a uniform. Vivienne, however, wasn't done. She took a small step closer, her perfume overpowering, as she leaned in slightly. We have a sister store a few blocks down, she said, her voice dripping with fake helpfulness. They carry more accessible in pieces if you'd be more comfortable there. Sandra let out a quiet chuckle, shaking her head. That's kind of you, but I think I'll stay. Vivienne's quiet smile tightened. The last thing she wanted was an out-of-place customer lingering in her boutique, making her elite clientele uncomfortable. As if on cue, a pair of elegantly dressed women sitting on one of the Haas lounge sofas glanced in Sandra's direction, whispering to each other behind manicured hands. Their subtle smirks told Vivienne that she needed to handle this situation fast. Then Sandra did something that made Vivienne's stomach twist. She reached for a high-end gown, a limited edition piece designed for an upcoming fashion gala. The price tag alone could buy a car. Vivienne's chest tightened. Enough. She turned to Clara, a junior sales assistant standing at the counter. With a discreet flick of her fingers, she signaled her. Clara, she said, her voice cool and unwavering. Please, keep an eye on our guest. Sandra heard that. She wasn't surprised, but she was definitely entertained. This was going to be so interesting. Clara hesitated. She had worked under Vivienne long enough to know what keep an eye on our guest really meant. It wasn't about customer service, it was about making sure she leaves. Sandra continued to browse, running her fingers over the fine silk and embroidered lace of a 20,000 dress. She didn't miss the way the atmosphere in the boutique shifted. The murmurs, the glances, the judgment hanging in the air. Vivian, standing with her arms crossed, watched like a hawk soar, waiting for Sandra to get the hint and walk out. Instead, Sandra did something that made Vivian's blood boil. She took the high-end gown off the rack and held it up to herself, examining it in the mirror. As if she actually belonged there. The room fell into a tense silence. Vivian took a slow breath, composing herself before stepping forward with an icy smile. "That particular dress is quite sophisticated," she said. "It requires a certain presence to truly carry it." Sandra turned to her, tilting her head slightly. "A certain presence?" Vivian's smile didn't falter. "Yes, a certain grace. Some people simply understand the art of couture better than others." Sandra let out a quiet laugh, soft yet cutting. "Ah, I see. And you think I wouldn't understand?" The boutique fell into silence again. The few VIP clients still pretending to browse were now openly watching, their curiosity piqued. Vivian gave a delicate shrug. "Some clients prefer things that are more practical, more comfortable. We all have our own styles." The coded insult was clear. Sandra smiled slightly, setting the dress back on the rack. Then she turned to Clara. "Clara," Sandra said casually, "what do you think? Would this dress suit me?" Clara's breath hitched. She could feel Vivian's sharp gaze burning into her, warning her not to step out of line. But then she looked at Sandra, the calm confidence, the quiet amusement in her expression. Clara swallowed hard and said, "Yes, it would look incredible on you." Vivian's jaw clenched. And just like that, the power in the room shifted. Vivian's fake smile faltered for just a econd, but it was enough. Sandra tilted her head slightly, watching the boutique manager's reaction with amusement. She had seen this game before. Vivian was used to being in absolute control, dictating who belonged and who didn't. But now, something was slipping. A small, unexpected crack in the perfect facade she had built. The tension in the boutique thickened as Clara shifted uncomfortably. She could feel Vivian's sharp gaze stabbing into her. But she had already spoken. She couldn't take it back. Sandra, still holding the exquisite gown, glanced at the luxury fitting rooms behind her. Then she turned back to Vivian. "I'd love to try this on." Vivian's eyelid twitched. She had two choices. One, let Sandra try the dress on and risk her presence lingering even longer, making the boutique's exclusive clientele uneasy. Two, find a way to get rid of her now. She chose the latter. Vivian's expression turned sympathetic, but her tone carried the same thinly veiled arrogance. "Oh, I'd love to assist you," she purred. "But unfortunately, that particular gown is already reserved for one of our VIP clients. It's unavailable for trials." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "Reserved?" Vivian nodded confidently, believing she had just ended this ridiculous interaction. But then the worst thing possible happened. A voice from the back of the store chimed in. "That's strange," Vivian stiffened. A tall woman in an emerald green dress, one of the boutique's regular elite clients, stood near a display shelf watching the exchange. "I was just looking at that same gown earlier, and no one told me it was reserved." A wave of quiet murmurs had spread through the boutique. Sandra smiled. Vivian had just walked into her own trap. Vivian's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. She forced another polite, practiced smile, trying to regain control. There must have been some miscommunication. But before she could finish, the boutique's front door chimed again. And in walked a man. The air in the boutique shifted instantly, because this wasn't just anyone, it was Clint Eastwood, and he had heard everything. The soft chime "oui" of the boutique's entrance bell rang through the air. It was a sound Vivian had heard 1,000 times before, but this time it felt different. The moment Clint Eastwood stepped inside, the energy in the boutique shifted. Everything froze. The sales assistants, the VIP clients, even Vivian herself. They all turned toward the door. The boutique, once filled with murmurs and condescending whispers, was now silent. Clint wasn't dressed like the other high-profile clients who walked in expecting red carpet treatment. He wore a simple dark jacket, jeans and boots, his sharp gaze scanning the room with an effortless intensity. But it wasn't his clothes that commanded respect. It was his presence. This was a man who didn't need luxury to prove his worth. Vivian's throat went dry because she knew exactly who he was. She had catered to celebrities before, actors, models, billionaires, but Clint Eastwood was different. He wasn't just another Hollywood star, he was a legend. And judging by the way he stared right at Sandra, he wasn't here by coincidence. Sandra smiled slightly, completely unfazed. Clint took slow, deliberate steps toward her. His boots clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing through the silent boutique. When he finally reached her, he stopped. He glanced at the white silk gown draped over her arm, then looked her in the eyes. And then, in that unmistakable, gravelly voice, he said, "Now that's a damn fine dress." Vivian swallowed hard. She could feel the entire boutique watching, waiting to see how she would respond. For the first time, she felt something she never had before: fear, because she had just humiliated Sandra Bullock. And now, Clint Eastwood was here, and he had heard everything. Vivian's heartbeat pounded in her ears as Clint Eastwood stood in front of Sandra, his piercing gaze scanning the boutique. He was a man of few words, but every glance, every slight movement carried an unshakable authority. Sandra Hunt smirked slightly, still holding the expensive gown. She could feel the power in the room shift. Just moments ago, she had been an outsider, a woman deemed unworthy by Vivian. But now, the presence of Clint Eastwood had changed everything. Vivian, however, wasn't ready to surrender. She forced a tense smile, gripping her clipboard a little too tightly. "Mr. Eastwood," she finally managed to say, her voice carefully polished but carrying an undeniable edge of nervousness. "Welcome to Elegance Privée. How can I assist you today?" Clint didn't even glance at her. He was focused on Sandra. "So," he drawled, tilting his head toward the gown in Sandra's hands. "Are you going to try that on, or are we just going to stand around all day?" A murmur rippled through the boutique. The VIP clients, who had been quietly observing, exchanged stunned glances. Vivian's smile flickered. She had spent her career carefully curating an elite clientele, making sure only the right kind of people walked through those doors. Clint Eastwood's rugged presence alone was enough to disrupt the fragile illusion of control she had so carefully crafted. Sandra lifted the dress slightly, her amusement growing by the second. "Well," she said, "I would, but apparently this dress is reserved." The moment the words left her lips, the boutique felt like it had been struck by lightning. Clint's expression darkened. He turned, slowly, toward Vivian, his stare so intense that she instinctively took a half step back. "Reserved, huh?" His voice was mellow, yet it cut through the air like a blade. Vivian tried to recover. I misspoke," she stammered quickly. "Of course, Ms. Bullock is welcome to try on anything she likes." Clint let out a slow, unimpressed exhale. He wasn't buying it. He turned to Sandra and gave her a small nod. "Go ahead. Try it on." Sandra grinned. And, just like that, Vivian lost the last shred of control she had. Because when Clint Eastwood gives you permission to do something, you do it. Vivian stood frozen. her breath shallow as Sandra Bullock casually walked toward the fitting rooms. The luxurious gown draped over her arm, the boutique, once filled with an air of exclusivity, now felt like a stage. And Vivienne was the villain of the story. Exposed under an unforgiving spotlight, she had spent years ensuring that only the right kind of people shopped here, and now she was witnessing something she had never prepared for. The tables turning. As Sandra disappeared behind the fitting room curtains, Clint Eastwood turned back to Vivienne. His stare was calm, but there was something in his icy blue eyes that sent a shiver down her spine. "Tell me something," he said, his voice low but firm. "That champagne you serve, does everyone get a glass or just the folks who look like they belong?" A hush fell over the boutique. Vivienne felt the weight of a dozen stares pressing down on her. She had made a critical mistake. And now Clint Eastwood was calling her out in front of everyone. Vivienne forced a tight smile, her mind racing for a way to fix this. "Oh, of course, sir, that was simply an oversight." An oversight. Clint repeated the word slowly, letting it hang in the air like a noose. The boutique staff shifted uncomfortably. Even the VIP clients who once whispered about Sandra behind their manicured hands were now watching Vivienne struggle, with thinly veiled satisfaction. She had always been the one passing judgment, but now she was the one being judged. Then, without breaking eye contact with Vivienne, Clint turned to Clara, the young sales assistant who had hesitated earlier. "Do me a favor, kid," he said. "Get my friend a glass of champagne, the best one you've got." Clara blinked. She looked at Vivienne, whose face had turned an alarming shade of white. Then back at Clint. And then, for the first time since she started working here, Clara made her own decision. She nodded. "Of course, sir." Vivienne's jaw tightened. But she said nothing. She knew that if she tried to stop Clara now, it would only make things worse. Clara disappeared into the back, leaving Vivienne standing, motionless, trapped in her own failure, and then, as if fate had a sense of humor, the one-fitting room curtains parted. Sandra Bullock stepped out, and when she did, every jaw in the boutique dropped. Because the dress, it wasn't just a perfect fit, it was a statement. The room fell into stunned silence. As Sandra Bullock stepped out of the fitting room, the black silk gown, draped effortlessly over her frame, flowed like liquid. With every step she took, the elegant cut hugged her curves in all the right places, and the intricate beadwork shimmered under the boutique's golden lights. She didn't just look good, she looked untouchable. The very same dress that Vivienne had subtly suggested was not for her, now looked like it had been designed just for Sandra. So, a slow, knowing smile curled at the corner of Sandra's lips as she stepped in front of the grand, full-length mirror. She adjusted the fabric slightly, turning to admire the fit, and then she spoke, her voice casual but razor sharp. "You know what? I think I'll take it." Vivienne stiffened. The VIP clients, who had once whispered about Sandra's casual appearance, now sat frozen, their eyes widening in realization. They knew exactly what was happening. Vivienne had humiliated her, insulted her, dismissed her, and yet here Sandra stood, elegant, composed, and absolutely proving her wrong. Clint Eastwood, arms crossed, let out a low chuckle. He tilted his head slightly, studying Vivienne's pale face with amusement. "Well," he said, his voice smooth but laced with challenge. "Aren't you going to ring her up?" Vivienne's throat tightened. She had two choices: swallow her pride and process the sale, or refuse and make this humiliation even worse. She forced a smile, but everyone could see the strain behind it. "Of course, Ms. Bullock." Sandra turned slightly, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, so now I'm Ms. Bullock?" A soft gasp came from somewhere in the boutique, A few VIP clients exchanged knowing glances, their expressions filled with satisfaction. Vivian's war face burned a cerise with humiliation. Clara returned just in time, carrying a furry flute of expensive champagne. She walked past Vivian, ignoring her completely, and handed it directly to Sandra. Sandra accepted it with a graceful nod, then lifted the glass and bought her mock toast. To luxury, she said, and the people who actually understand it. She took a slow sip. Vivian's fingers clenched into fists, but before she could respond, the boutique doors chimed again. And what happened next would change everything. The soft, chimey whine of the boutique's doors echoed like a gunshot. In the silent room, everyone's eyes snapped toward the entrance. A man stepped inside, tall, gray-haired, and exuding an aura of quiet authority. It was William DuPont, the owner of Elegance Privée. Vivian's stomach twisted. The one person she never wanted this disaster had just walked. His eyes, too, swept the bay, taking in the tense atmosphere, the stunned expressions of his VIP clients, and finally, his gaze settled on Sandra Bullock standing elegantly in the black silk, sipping champagne. Then his eyes landed on Clint Eastwood. Sandra, completely at ease, turned toward him and said with a smile, "Ah, Mr. DuPont, you have a lovely store." His expression tightened. He knew exactly what was happening. The air thickened. With tension, Vivian took a shaky step forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. DuPont, I can explain," but Clint cut her off. His voice was low, steady, but sharp as a blade. "I don't think you can." A pre-career pin-drop silence followed. The boutique staff stiffened, sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. DuPont turned his gaze to Clara, the young assistant who had bravely sided with Sandra. His tone was neutral but firm. "Would you kindly tell me what happened here?" Clara swallowed hard. She hesitated for just a second, then stood tall. "Ms. Bullock was treated unfairly, sir," she said clearly. "She wasn't offered champagne. She was told the dress was reserved, and she was judged." Vivian flinched. Sandra took another sip of her drink, her gaze smile widening slightly. DuPont's face remained unreadable as he turned his attention back to Vivian. "Is this true?" Vivian opened her mouth, scrambling for an excuse, a justification, anything. But there was nothing she could say. Everyone in the boutique had seen it. He knew the truth. Clint let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "You know, Vivian," he said, his voice low but dripping with irony. "You're awfully selective about who deserves luxury." Vivian's her face turned ghostly white. She knew what was coming. Then, William DuPont said the words that sealed her fate. "Vivian, please step into my office. Now." The entire boutique held its breath. Vivian faltered, her hands trembling slightly, but she had no choice. Slowly she turned and walked toward the back office, and just like that, her reign ended. Sandra took one last sip of champagne, then placed the glass on the counter. She turned to Clint and, with a smirk, said, "Well, that was fun." Clint chuckled. "Damn right." And then, without another word, Sandra handed her credit card to Clara. "I'll take the dress." The room erupted into whispers. Vivian may have lost her place in the boutique, but Sandra? She had just claimed it. Vivian's footsteps disappeared into the back office, leaving behind a boutique filled with stunned silence. Clara, still holding Sandra Bullock's credit card, hesitated for just a second before snapping into action. She walked to the mock register, entered the transaction, and, just for the poetic justice of it, wrapped the dress with extra care, placing it inside an elegant boutique bag. As she handed the bag to Sandra, there was A quiet shift in the air. Sandra wasn't just another customer anymore. She was andDoes, the customer, one of the whispering VIP clients. A blonde woman with an expensive designer purse suddenly stood up from the lounge area. She walked toward Clara and gestured toward a dress on the rack. "I'll take that one." A murmur spread through the boutique. Another woman stood up. "Actually, I'd like to try something on." One by one, customers who had once snickered at Sandra's casual appearance now saw the power shift in full effect. Sandra Bullock wasn't just a Hollywood actress. She was an icon. And now, everyone wanted to be on the right side of this moment. Clint Eastwood let out a low, approving chuckle, shaking his head as he watched the boutique transform before his eyes. Sandra, still calm and composed, turned back to Clara. "Keep my receipt," she said with a knowing smirk. "You never know when a place like this will need proof of who really understands luxury." Clara grinned, nodding. The high front doors of the boutique chimed again. But this time, Sandra didn't need to look back. She and Clint walked toward the exit together, side by side, unbothered and victorious. Vivian? She was nowhere to be seen. As they reached the doors, Clint paused tight. Turning back just for a second, his eyes scanned the boutique one last time, stopping at the champagne station. Then, in a voice low but laced with humor, he said, "Funny how respect costs nothing, but some people still can't afford it." Sandra chuckled. "Ain't that the truth?" And with that, the doors closed behind them. Outside, the K's sun shined brighter, and the air felt a little lighter. Sandra Bullock had come into Elegance Privée as a nobody in a hoodie. She walked out as the woman who changed everything. As the boutique doors clicked shut, a tense silence lingered inside Elegance Privée. The staff exchanged uneasy glances. Their VIP clients, once so smug and judgmental, now sat deep in thought, their opinions of the store and themselves shaken. At the register, Clara held Sandra Bullock's receipt tightly. It felt less like a transaction and more like a symbol of change. Then the door to the back office creaked open. Vivian emerged out. Her face pale, her hands trembling. Her usual air of superiority was gone, replaced by something she had never experienced before: humiliation. She had been in charge here for years. She had dictated who belonged and who didn't. She had built her reputation on his exclusivity, power, and control. But now, she had none of it left. The whispers began. A statuesque, tall, elegantly dressed woman. One of the VIP regulars leaned toward her friend and muttered, "If they treated Sandra Bullock like that, imagine how they treat us when no one's watching." That single sentence sealed Vivian's fate. The trust, the illusion of the boutique's prestige, all of it crumbled in an instant. Vivian's phone buzzed in her palm. Her fingers trembled as she turned the screen over. It was a message from William DuPont, the boutique owner. "Vivian, we need to talk. Now." She swallowed hard. She already knew what that meant. Her career? Over? Her status? Gone. The very exclusivity she had enforced for years had just turned against he. Clara, watching from behind the register, felt something she never thought she'd feel in this store. Relief. For once, someone stood up to the arrogance, the judgment, the silent cruelty that had been disguised as exclusivity. And for the first time, Clara realized she didn't want to be part of this world anymore. With a quiet, steady hand, she reached up, unclipped her Elegance Privée name tag, and placed it gently on the counter. She had made her decision. Vivian watched in horror as Clara turned and walked out one of the boutique, and with that, she realized she wasn't just losing her job. She had lost everything. The full cool air. Outside the boutique was a sharp contrast to the suffocating tension inside. As Clara stepped out. She let out a slow breath. One she didn't even realize she had been holding. For the first time since she started working at L'Agence Privée, she felt free. A few steps ahead, Sandra Bullock and Clint Eastwood stood near the sidewalk, talking in low, amused tones. Clara hesitated. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she took a deep breath and walked toward them. Sandra, still holding the boutique bag, turned and smiled warmly as Clara approached. "Decided to make your grand exit?" Sandra asked, raising an eyebrow. Clara let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "I think it was time." Clint gave a slow nod, studying her with his usual calm intensity. "Good choice, kid." Clara bit her lip. She had no job now, no plan, just the knowledge that she couldn't go back to that place. But before she could spiral into uncertainty, Sandra spoke again. "So, what's next for you?" Clara hesitated. "I don't know." Sandra exchanged a look with Clint, one that Clara didn't quite understand. Then Sandra reached into her beard designer purse, pulled out a small white card bureau and handed it to her. Clara glanced down. It had Sandra Bullock's personal assistant's number on it. She blinked in shock, looking back up at the actress. "What?" Sandra grinned. "I know a thing or two about people who actually understand customer service." Clint let out a low chuckle. "And people who don't take crap from anyone." Clara stared at them for a moment, her heart pounding with disbelief. Was this really happening? Sandra tapped the card gently in Clara's hand. "Call that number. I might have something better for you." Clara felt her throat tighten. She wasn't sure what to say, except for two words. "Thank you," Sandra just smiled. Then, with one final nod, Sandra Bullock and Clint Eastwood walked off together, disappearing into the bustling streets. Clara stood there for a long moment, staring at the card in her hand. Then, as a slow smile spread across her face, she turned and walked away, toward a new future. Meanwhile, across the city, Vivian sat alone in her once pristine office, staring blankly at her computer screen. She had just read an email from Yas William DuPont. "Effective immediately, your employment with L'Agence Privée has been terminated." Her fingers trembled over the keyboard. She clicked open a gay social media post, and there it was, a video of Sandra Bullock's boutique experience. The footage, captured by an anonymous shopper, had gone viral, over 30 million views. The comments were brutal. "This is why I hate these so-called luxury stores. Sandra Bullock is pure class. That manager? Not so much. Clint Eastwood just standing there, watching it all unfold, was everything." Vivian felt sick, her entire reputation. The prestige she had spent years building was gone overnight. She closed her laptop slowly, her reflection staring back at her in the dark screen, and for the first time she realized she had been so obsessed with luxury that she had but forgotten the one thing that truly mattered. Respect. The end.